Hello and welcome along to the RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast in association with Bank of Ireland. Week 1 of the Rugby World Cup is down. Ireland making light work of Romania. France laying down a mark against New Zealand. The Springboks fending off Scotland. George Ford's heroics for England against a fairly brutal Argentina. And not forgetting the game of the round as well. Wales clinging on against Fiji in a belter of a match in Bordeaux on Sunday night. An enormous amount to get through. James Downey is back with us again this week. James, how are you?
Neil, very good, thank you.
And delighted as well to bring in a World Cup winner for the ride. BJ Botha from South Africa's 2007 squad is with you. Welcome back to Ireland, BJ. A couple of new coaching gigs for you this season. You're with UL Bows in the AIL and also Glenstal Abbey in the Munster Senior Cup.
Yes, yeah, Neil, thanks for having me. Yeah, great to be here. And it's been a little bit of a whirlwind, so still finding my feet, but yeah, looking forward to the season ahead.
Well, luckily you were back in South Africa for a little while before coming back to Ireland there recently enough. So really curious to get your thoughts a bit later on how Ireland are being viewed by those down in South Africa ahead of what's to come in a couple of weeks' time. We'll get straight into it though, and we will start with Ireland's 82-8 win against Romania in Bordeaux on Saturday. A pretty straightforward day's work for Andy Farrell's side, aside from conceding a try inside the opening 2 minutes, but there were 12 tries with little fuss in the heat as well, and it looks like all players have come through without any injury disruption. Before we get the thoughts of BJ and James, Michael Corcoran caught up with a couple of the players after the game. Caelan Doris, and first, here's Tadhg Beirne.
With Tadhg Beirne, congratulations, a great win. Fantastic workmanlike performance, and 2 tries for you. That last try, I think, epitomised the whole team attitude.
Yeah, I think so. I think, coming into the game, we wanted to lay down a marker and for first and foremost get the win, and then obviously we wanted to score as many tries as we possibly could. And I think at half time we felt like we had a lot more in us, and I think it showed our mentality there at the end, where we were camped on our line, but we wanted to keep the ball alive and ended up going the other end of the pitch to get another try. So we're very pleased with that.
As one of the lucky ones who had a seat, what was it like to play out there on that pitch?
Yeah, it was hot. First half I didn't find too bad. Second half at times it was difficult, but we have trained for this. We've done probably tougher training sessions than that game and that game overall. So we were pretty ready for it, and I think we probably showed other times how fit we are.
So a lot to be pleased about in terms of a first game of a Rugby World Cup. Good to hit the ground running, good to get the games, game minutes into your legs.
Absolutely, and I think for the lads who hadn't had a World Cup game, it's great for them to have that ticked off as well. And we've started well, and just need to keep that up and keep improving our performances game by game now.
Caelan Doris, congratulations. Tremendous win, tremendous performance in really very, very difficult conditions out there.
Yeah, it was roasting, definitely melting. The scrum cap as well added to that, trying to stay in the shade as best as possible, but it wasn't always possible. Good to get up and running, lots of decent stuff in there. Some of our attack is very pleasing. Happy with some of the tries we scored in that last one at the end, the mentality to keep going. So yeah, it's a good place to start, and looking forward to kicking on now.
A bit of a shock to the system in the opening 3 minutes.
Yeah, that wasn't quite the plan, but we're happy with how we sort of moved on to the next moment. Didn't let it bother us, and they didn't score again, obviously, bar the penalty, so that was pleasing.
And those tries before halftime really gave you a solid grip on the game. I mean, what was the message from Andy and the coaches at halftime?
Just to keep going, stick to our basics, stick to our fundamentals, what's made us a good team over the last couple of years. We did some good things in the first half, but there was a little bit of scrappy stuff and going away from the plan and the script a little bit, so just get back to that and trust in it.
And just a word about Johnny Sexton, what was it like having him back on the pitch again, barking around the place?
Makes some difference. He's obviously been training with us and been leading things in the background quite a bit, but he empowers everyone else on the pitch, makes some difference, so yeah, glad to have him back.
So that was Caelan Doris, and before that, Tadhg Beirne as well, speaking to RT Sports, Michael Corcoran. Guys, to start out with, I mean, there isn't really a huge amount we can say about the match just because of the gulf between the two sides on the day. But James, from an Irish point of view, it probably went as well as I think Andy Farrell could have hoped. They got a decent run out. They put up a bit of a score as well, which may or may not come into play if points difference are crucial down the line. 12 tries, most of them well taken. Johnny Sexton got in, looked sharp on his return. And all importantly as well, no injuries. It seems like anyway. We'll obviously find out a little bit more later today when the coaches are up for media duty and the players as well, and we get an update. But all in all, a solid weekend's work.
Yeah, very much so. I think as well, it's got to be put down to a nice statement win. You know, it's you kind of, it's the unknown of what we're going into before that game, and everyone's nervous, still a little bit nervous going into kind of the next couple of rounds. But I think you got to be happy with the 12 tries, you know, and as you mentioned there, Johnny Sexton getting 65 minutes, which was kind of more than most thought. You know, I personally thought they were going to take him off after 50 or just after half time, get those minutes in his legs. But to go to 65, obviously he's going to pose a question on selection this week. But I think everyone's got to be delighted with that. You know, 12 tries. You could see from the other games as well, the heat having such an impact, and for the players to keep going. And in that 80th minute, Matt Hansen deciding to run the ball back. I'm sure, and then Andy Farrell said he wanted him to kick it off, but then turned into a great team try. But look, all in all, bar that first couple of minutes when not too much you can do about that opportunist try from the Romanians. Pretty happy with how everything went, and I think certain players put up their hand to give Andy Farrell a bit of a selection headache going forward.
Yeah, and BJ, one of the interesting things, James mentioned it there, that the last try in particular, of the 12, that was clearly the one that Andy Farrell was most pleased with at the end of the game, because I remember going back as far as when Ireland played Fiji last November. It was a 30-something 7 win or something like that. It was a fairly mundane victory, and Ireland weren't really at their best. And what Andy Farrell said after that game, what really he seemed to take issue with, was the fact that at the end of the match, clock hit 80, and I can't remember who it was for Ireland, but just kicked the ball out and saw things off. And Farrell he wanted to see a lot more ruthlessness in his side, that they were just satisfied to get in and out with the victory. But the fact that Ireland were 75-8 up when the clock is dead in the boiling heat in Bordeaux, when I was there, I can tell you it was absolutely scalding hot. And still they were going to try get one more score. They weren't satisfied to just put it out. They were going to run it out from deep. And I don't think anyone would have batted an eyelid if they just kicked out that ball. But as I said, there isn't a lot we can read from this game, but one thing Farrell was clearly pleased with was the attitude of the players throughout those 80 minutes, that they weren't content to just wrap up their victory and get on to Tonga next week, that they wanted to be as ruthless as they possibly could.
Yeah, there's no doubt, and a kind of a sign of a quality side, really. I suppose they kind of just process around building through the World Cup, really, and it shows that the team, you know, these games have got a kind of a way of running away with you, guys spreading it wide, you know, just really getting really loose. And I suppose that's what Farrell's probably referring to, that the guys still stuck to the plan, the process. And, you know, obviously with respect to Romania, they weren't going to be any threat, and we expected the scoreline. But it's how we put that together, and the performance side building through the World Cup with this. And then the other side we'd be very pleased with, I suppose, is a clear bill of health. I think these games, you're kind of really panicking as a head coach about getting players injured. I mean, and that's the big part. I think a bigger part anyway, leading into now the World Cup and having your squad, especially Ireland. I think, you know, they've got a top squad, but I sometimes question the depth around certain positions. You know, for me, going forward against South Africa, I think they're very well able. We'll speak later about it, but and just in this Ireland game, just in this Romania game, I think they'll be very happy to, you know, pull everyone through without injury.
Yeah, and the injury thing, obviously, James, as well. Like, there was a moment when Johnny Sexton scored that try just before half time, and it was Jason Tamani just kind of stood on his hand as he dived in, and you could see Sexton was kind of clenching his wrist or his hand or whatever it was, and there was just this kind of sinking feeling around the stadium of, oh God, don't tell us something's after happening here to Johnny Sexton. And the relief to see him coming out after halftime, you know, considering the match was done and dusted at that stage, the fact that he did play on for 25 minutes shows he was obviously perfectly fine to continue. But it just summed up the need to get in and out of those 80 minutes without an injury. Now, I know Robbie Henshaw picked up a bit of a hamstring niggle beforehand. It does seem like he will be available to play this week if selected. But to get through it, those 80 minutes unscathed against a side that what they could offer Romania was a lot of physicality, in fairness to them. And the dominant tackle stats, to their credit, were quite impressive. So they were bringing the physicality. So get in and out of those 80 minutes unscathed and onto Tonga this week is obviously the big plus.
Yeah, massively so. And you kind of look what's around the corner, and you mentioned physicality, and the Tongans are going to bring that high level of physicality as we saw against the Samoans. And the fact that the Tongans haven't played yet and they're sitting back watching, they'll be chomping at the bit to get out there and put on a performance. And it's their first game. They'll have focused on Ireland. That's all they've seen for the last while, and I'm sure those boys are raring to go. So the physicality side of, yes, the Romanians, but it's going to be stepped up another notch. And when Johnny got that try, now I was pretty I saw him kind of slowing down. I was like, man, just put it down and or dive over, protect yourself, and because it's the small little innocuous things that can send you off. And as you say, the game was done. Just put it down, score it, make it easy. He just slowed up, and I was like, oh, you're just asking for trouble. And I know he turned around and was pretty annoyed with him coming in on the tackle. But if he knocks that ball out, everyone's saying he's a hero. So just get it down and get out of there. And I was just so worried. Now he's holding on to the wrist, and I said, that's not what we need, you know. But fair play, he got back on and controlled things so well. So yeah, injuries are, we avoided all those.
It's clear, BJ, as well, just what he brings to the Irish team, like just some of the sharpness. There was a period, I think Ireland's worst period, probably from around 20 to 30 minutes. It was after that water break in the first half that probably took the sting out of Ireland a little bit, and you could see Sexton was getting quite frustrated with it. And there was a point where Ireland won a penalty just right around the edge of the 22, and Sexton had the ball probably about 30 yards back and sprints up to the 22 to take that penalty as quick as he could, because you could see he knew Ireland needed to get some pace back into their game, that they'd probably just kind of gone into a bit of a lull. Ultimately, from that quick tap penalty, Romania conceded a yellow card and Ireland scored another couple of tries before half time. Then the fact that he got 2 more tries as well for himself. On top of that, early second half, Ireland win a penalty 3 or 4 meters inside the Romania half, and he sticks it to within 5 meters of the line. It was those small little things that he brings to the Irish side that just stitches everything together. And for a man, as we said last week, 38 years old, coming back in to play his first game in 6 months, big layoff, obviously some of it self-inflicted, as he said himself after the game, but it was a great little blowout for him for 65 minutes, and he looked like he hadn't taken a backward step.
Yeah, there's no doubt on how valuable he is to Ireland. And, he shows that with his experience. I mean, the team just flows a lot better. He seems just to have so much more time, and really it's a great scene to watch. And going into the World Cup, they'd be definitely take a lot of confidence, I think, from this, and him playing 60 odd minutes. However, I think the next kind of challenge is a selection against Tonga, because we know where Tonga is going to be running. Down the channel, one-way traffic all day. And I suppose that's the big thing for me around Tonga. And James already mentioned the physicality. If they thought, I suppose they wouldn't underestimate it. But if Romania was physical, then, Tonga is just going to take that through the roof. And I experienced that in 2007. And it was a game we almost lost at the end. And it wasn't actually about just the skill level, with all respect. It was the physicality, about tackling and tackling. And it's not just, and it's just that physicality side that they have to come around now, and who they're going to be using with South Africa on the horizon. So I think this is the big game for Ireland, for me, in the sense of what, they're going to be, how they're going to be damage control around, because they still have to show Tonga respect. They've a couple of new players in, so it's going to be interesting how they work this one. And Johnny is, again, a player they need throughout the whole tournament. So it's going to be interesting one how they work this.
As a South African, will you just be sitting back with your feet up, watching every tackle, watching Tonga rough up as many Irish players as possible?
Yeah, watching the collisions now. It's a sight to watch these, watching Tonga and Samoa and Fiji, and especially Tonga and Samoa. Again, you have these ingrained in your memory from 2007, playing both of them in the pool games, and it was they just drain you. That physicality. You don't have enough turnaround time, and it's we'll be looking back. But look, I mean, I'm kind of all for Ireland, doing well. Just in a couple of weeks' time, not so much, So we'll see how we go. And again, I have a lot of friends on the side, and I'm very pleased for where they are in World Rugby, and I look forward to them doing really, really well.
Well, look, fingers crossed for you. There'll be 2 Ireland South Africa meetings at this World Cup. James, last week, yourself and Darren Cave, we were talking about the centre options for Ireland, and I think he kind of said Robbie Henshaw and Gary Ringrose would be your preferred option. But again, we have to kind of caveat everything, all of what we say from this game, with the fact that Romania obviously weren't anywhere near the level required. But Bundee was streets ahead of pretty much every player on the pitch at the weekend. 20 carries, 190 meters with the ball in hand, 2 tries. And I know, obviously, he was considerably better than the players he was opposite with Romania, but just looked so sharp in everything he did.
Yeah, he did. And I was I did contemplate my words when I was watching the game, and I said, I think I've gotten that one completely wrong with kind of Robbie and Gary, because if I looked to this week, I would kind of, if I was going to give Robbie some minutes, I'd take out Gary, and you got to keep Bundee in there for that physicality as well, especially what you're going to receive this week with the Tongans. But Bundee was superb in everything he did. You could see he was a man on a mission. He had a point to prove, and again, it's a statement for him to the coaches that I want to be your starting centre come the big games, come that game against South Africa, come Scotland, and come the latter rounds. And I think he's done himself no harm in everything he did. Yes, okay, you got to take the opposition into consideration, but everything he did was good. He carried hard, he offloaded, he supported well, and he played with a smile on his face and made some good line breaks too.
Obviously, could be reading too much into it, but do you think maybe the fact that he had that red card at the tournament 4 years ago and ended up missing the quarter final, do you think that's playing on his mind coming into this tournament, that he probably owes it to himself maybe to put in a statement performance over these few weeks?
I don't think so. I think that's a lot's happened since then. I think he's a more mature player now. He's more kind of, I think, especially with this new regime, he seems to just not be as he uses his head a little bit more rather than heart, and he's not all passion now. He's a smarter player, as I would see it, and as I said, he showed last week, and he's a team player much more so than he has been previously. And I just think it's credit to him that he's done so well. And look, he's, as I say, I put my hands up and I said it was Robbie Gary, so it's Bundee for me at the moment.
Yeah, I have to sorry, just come in there, and I agree with James. There's no doubt. And again, we talk about South Africa. When Bundee's been on form against South Africa, that's when they've really put South Africa under pressure, because that defensive line that South Africa bring doesn't stop him on the line. So that physicality just takes that 2 meters over the Vonge line, which slows down that speed of the line, which allows then Ireland to kind of come onto the ball really hard. And then that just runs out of, I suppose, its steam at some stage, not always. But he's a vital cog there, and especially now that he's hitting form. So he's going to be a vital cog going forward for them, no doubt.
Joe McCarthy then was obviously the other standout selection in the squad last week, and did pretty well. He got his try, 17 carries, only Bundee had more, 6 tackles, only Peter O'Mahony put in more. He had a couple of turnovers, had mauls, a couple of big moments, like getting around in the physical, in the tight exchanges as well. So a really, really active 80 minutes from him. Obviously, he might be a bit disappointed being held up over the line a few times. How did you, I suppose it's a twofold question. I might go to Bundee first. How did you think he went on Saturday? And then also, what do you think his chances are of earning selection for that game against South Africa?
Against me, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, I think he's, watching the game, again, take it into context, it's Romania. And he played well and he put up his hand, but he's still a really inexperienced player at international level. So that's my one concern going into the games and being putting up his hand for a selection. I don't know. I've got questions around that. However, it's great to have him now, and I think that put him into the Tongan, kind of selection squad, and then see him prove himself there again, and then obviously make a decision post that. But there's no doubt that he's, great to have someone on performing on, at a World Cup and, knock you on that door. I think that's the most important thing from a depth perspective. There's no doubt around that. So I think going forward, I did think about, do you put Tyg Byrne at kind of, back row and then bring him into the second row? I'm not too sure about that. I think in the bigger games, the experience will tell. But yeah, it's going to be interesting how they are. And I think he will possibly be selected against Tonga. again, and then kind of they'll probably reassess then.
I think it brings in Ian Henderson then to that conversation of, I'm sure he still has plenty to offer in the back of that. You look at Joe's performance, agree with BJ and how he's young, he's inexperienced. I reckon they'll give him another shot this weekend, but I think Henderson going forward to South Africa, it's a big call for them to make, to kind of put Joe in there and to parachute him in, relatively inexperienced at the level as BJ's noted there. So Henderson still has a lot to say in this World Cup, and he's an experienced player against a top quality side like the South Africans. Will it be that experience? And the coaches have to make this call.
Well, to move it on then, whether it's Joe McCarthy or Ian Henderson or even a Ryan Baird, do you like the idea of Ireland going with an extra second row in there and keeping Tyg Byrne in the back row for the game in South Africa? Bearing in mind, you also have to decide which of those back row players drops to the bench, whether it's Josh van der Flier again, or whether it's Peter O'Mahony, and then potentially Jack Conan is also available for that game as well. So there's a lot of options. There's a lot of options in there.
There's a lot of look, and that's the permutations that we want to have, and it's so good that we have this depth that I think we'll need it, especially we look at this weekend. I'm sure he will give some players a go to try and put up the hand, also try and be a bit smarter with the squad and try and rest a couple of players for that next game as well. But as BJ says, while still showing that respect to Tonga. Look, ultimately, we should beat Tonga. And this is an opportunity for some players to put up their hand, get some minutes in their legs as we did in the first game. And selection, I'm sure he's going to have written down a selection for before this World Cup of who he'd like to see, and I'm sure people might have changed his mind a little bit, so he's going to have to do maybe one or two tweaks, but it's certainly good to have the options, and it's a chance for someone else to kind of maybe put up their hand this week and try and force their way into selection. But you've got to keep an eye on that South African in the back of your mind, and where you go with it's going to be extremely interesting. Do you go with the physicality? Do you drop a Van der Flier who's done absolutely nothing wrong, or do you leave Pete out and put as you say, Tyg Byrne in the back row? There's so many different permutations and combinations that we can have, but where we go with it, I don't know.
BJ, final question then to you, and it's just following on from that as well. As a South African, what would be the kind of the makeup of the pack you would least like to come up against for the Springboks next week? Would it be what we've traditionally seen of James Ryan and Tyg Byrne in the second row, and a Van der Flier, Doris and Peter O'Mahony back row, or like an Ian Henderson or Joe McCarthy or Ryan Baird in the second row alongside James Ryan, with Tyg Byrne, Caelan Doris and one of Peter O'Mahony or Josh van der Flier then alongside them? Which would you be more confident facing?
Probably the more unsettled, untraditional setup, I suppose, with James Ryan. I would say the more general Tyg Byrne, James Ryan at second row, Doris, O'Mahony. I think the South Africans would rather prefer the other pack. That pack you talk about, the ones that they always go with. I think that's the side that's more settled. I think they definitely a lot more threatening, and more importantly, I think, is then what comes off the bench. And I suppose we haven't spoken about this bench setup and what the South Africans are going to bring now again. So I think for me, they have to go with that test match. As we know, it's a kind of a more, how can I say, turnover game, getting the points, and that kind of almost strangling and slowly but surely, sapping out that energy, and then bringing on the kind of the guys off the bench. So are more likely to kind of, I would say, South Africa would probably prefer to face a more unsettled pack with Joe McCarthy and these guys inexperienced in the pack, because again, I mentioned the back five of Ireland really are now in a place where, they've got options all over the line out. And they've almost got kind of a similar dynamic to South Africans, obviously, maybe with some different variants in height with Erge Snyman and these guys putting out the height barometer. But there's no doubt that they'll need them at set piece. And that's one area that Ireland need to not only take themselves, but need to put that pressure on South Africa. I think we've seen a little turning point in the Scotland game where that one scrum end of the game, showed a little bit of glimmer of hope in the scrum from South Africa. So who knows what Ireland might do and come for them down there. But we know how solid, obviously, South Africa's maulers, and that's another area that Ireland will have to look at.
Moving on to South Africa's win against Scotland in Marseille on Sunday evening. 18-3 in the end, 6-3 at halftime, and tries in the second half from Pieter-Steph du Toit and Kurt Leorense, giving South Africa and the world champions a fairly comfortable win in the end. And BJ, I think, would it be fair to say 18-3 probably flattered Scotland more than it did South Africa if you factor in the missed kicks from missed kicks from Manny Libbok in the end as well. It was a pretty comfortable South African second half in the end.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think I was looking at the scoreline at 35 minutes, 36 minutes, it was still 6-0 only. And it seemed like South Africa had been in control really the whole game. Really, Scotland under pressure, they'd find some way to just keep the South Africans out, getting over the try line. And there were some obviously areas of the defensive side that South Africa were just frantic and coming out of line, but then they seemed to cover it, So they put Scotland under a huge amount of pressure. And obviously, moving on in the greens, they didn't allow Finn Russell to do anything really that he usually does. And I think they were just basically trying to, in one part, South Africa were trying to just, again, damage control, with respect to Scotland, get the win first and foremost, hence the fact that we're going for poles, and really just get through this game unscathed. And I think they, with you saying that the kind of goal kicking and that, I think the scoreline maybe did flatten them a little bit. But again, Scotland is a quality side. They've shown that in the past and a tough side to put away.
James, South Africa are the kind of team that they don't always have the scoreboard dominance that they should. And, you can sometimes look at a South Africa game and think it was a lot closer than it was. And 18-3, I think, is along those lines this weekend, where barring those last 5-10 minutes of the first half when Scotland picked off a couple of big penalties and Finn Russell made a kick, that was probably all they could muster. If you look at some of the stats, like the way South Africa handled the game, Scotland's average ruck speed was just under 5 seconds. Like, they did a brilliant job slowing it down, but also then defensively as well. The pressure they had Finn Russell and Scotland's centres as well, Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones under pressure with, they really struggled to make any clean breaks or make any real ground.
Yeah, and I think that's it starts with that kind of that breakdown where South Africa really slowed down the ball, and then South Africa were able to get their defensive line set nice and early, and they had numbers. And as you say, the South African tactic was get that line speed. They were blitzing up so quickly, trying to put Finn Russell under so much pressure that he threw an intercept, or he panicked, or he tried something miraculous. And he tried a few things, but he was just unable to unlock it, And South Africa were just so comfortable. It was nearly like Scotland, keep having the ball and we'll keep knocking you back all day. And they didn't really threaten South Africans' defence, which is bar maybe one or two occasions when Darcy Graham had an opportunity and didn't give it to Van der Merwe up the wing, and he kind of held on to it when I thought he should have given it. That was a kind of opportunity missed, but that was a glimmer, a chink in the armour perhaps that I saw that Ireland can certainly take into the game against them, that there is some space if you can get around that blitz defence that they bring up, and if you can be patient and understand that the South Africans are going to bring this line speed and not panic under the situation, because that's what they're trying to do. Slow down your ball, be in control. Like Ireland's, again, looking at this Ireland-South Africa game, Ireland have line speed, which has been pretty quick, and that's kind of frustrated teams defending against them. So if Ireland can manage to get more than parity at the breakdown, get kick ball again, that will allow the South African defence not get aligned and not be as set as it was against Scotland. So I think that's something to take on into that game.
Yeah, the amount of space that was out wide was really fascinating to see. It was just that Scotland couldn't get the ball there. And there was a really interesting statistic that sums it up, BJ, that Scotland had the highest percentage of carries which were 2 or more passes away from the breakdown. So of 73%. So you could see they were trying desperately to get the ball out wide as quick as possible. But as risky as the South African defence was, it was the execution of it was really, really impressive. And they were shutting them down before they could get that ball out wide.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And it's something else, really, I suppose, in one sense, because, again, you need everyone to buy into that system. It's no second guessing. It's no basically taking a step back. It's really everyone buying in. And even when they did possibly try and get the ball wide, I think at one side, I think it was Libbok coming across, and he still had the pace to maybe get across, whether we would have made the tackle or not, but they still had that cross cover. So yeah, as a attack, you have this peripheral, that you basically just feel and see. And that just already automatically, does affect sometimes the pass, and that kind of pass that comes out where one little pass just off and not in front of the player, that then just allows that defense to, just to be right on top of you. So it really has to be, pitch perfect, which Johnny and these guys do really well, So that's the area they do really well. Their passes are exceptionally quick, smooth, crisp. They do that well, and they shift that ball. So there's no doubt that they will use that, but there's, as with South Africa, you can't just be kind of trying to go around them. There has to be stages where we have to go through them.
Yeah.
And that's going to have to also take place.
Yeah. And Scotland really struggled with that side of things. The follow on from that question then, James, and BJ, you can follow in after it as well. And it's something that it's a question we got on Twitter from Paul Roach. He says, we'll be interested in the panelist's advice on the best way to break down that South Africa defence. So obviously we've explained why they were efficient at it, but what's the next step of then how do you get around it? How do you get that ball out wide? And how do you take advantage of how aggressive they are with the line speed?
There's a couple of ways you can do it, I suppose. With line speed, initially, there is the option to put a little chip in behind to put the doubt in the defence of
keep them honest.
Exactly, and some teams, especially at the start of a game, they're keen to put a hit in. The emotions are high, just to take it out of it, because the last thing they want is the South Africans to get a big hit, get their sails up and be, you can see they get so encouraged by a big hit, and they can high-fiving each other. Take that sting out of it. Just a little chip in behind, take the line speed out. They don't get to make the big hit. They get a little bit frustrated. Obviously, you're still going to have to play. I still think that if they do come up, it's about, like we saw Bundee kind of do it, trailing on Robbie's inside or on Johnny's inside. Just a little dummy that come from, if a little late pass, and he can come off his shoulder if the South Africans haven't numbered up right. And then also there's the case of you just got to hold your depth and try and get around that out wide. And we do have the back three, I suppose, that have the pace to get around and the handling ability to get around there. But sometimes easier said than done, But I think initially it's got to take the sting out. Sometimes you're just going to have to take the few hits. But I'd like to see a couple of chips in behind potentially, just to take that sting out. Variations and options. Speed of ball is going to be massively key as well. Speed of ball at that breakdown won't allow the South African defence get settled. And it's about South Africa having to repeat constantly, getting back in the line, coming up again, getting back in the line, coming up again, which is really hard to do, having done it 2 or 3 times. To do it 4 or 5 times, you're going to get a stagnant defender. You're going to get maybe a lazy defender. And they're going to try and have to, well, I'm sure they're going to try and look to pick someone off of that. Look, easier said than done, of course, because when South Africa knock you behind the line, it's very hard to get realigned again. And you've the attacking team have to go behind the gain line and reset and set to go again. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting tactics. And I'm sure the Irish boys have looked at it, but there's certainly a few options.
BJ?
Yeah, I suppose I'll definitely echo what James says there about the kicking game. There's no doubt that just takes that little bit of that edge off the line speed. But the big area there for me is really the breakdown, and obviously we know that in rugby, but the breakdown speed, and I suppose if Ireland can get that right, they've got the individual plays to get over the gain line by stepping, by breaking through a tackle, like we mentioned, Bundee, Peter, Manny, Doris, these guys that can get their hands free for an offload. And I suppose that's that area that you want to really expose. Because when they do make those tackles and it's kind of a ruck, that's when they do go straight for the counter and they kind of get that ascendancy there. And that's why it becomes that 4 or 5 second ruck. So it's so cutting edge, and it's going to be on that kind of balance in regard to that. So if they can go that 3, 4, 5, 6 phases, be patient, get that speed still coming through, they're going to find that space through the middle, I think. And then they can bring that defensive line in a little bit and then really get the time to get it out wide. And then that balance with some kicking, some real precise kicking to get the ball back, we're in for a hell of a game.
I mentioned it earlier. I'm interested to get your thoughts, BJ, and your take on how are Ireland being viewed down in South Africa? Are they being viewed as Are South Africans considering themselves favourites for this game in 10 days' time? How's all that playing out? Is there a fear, a wariness around Ireland, or will South Africans generally be fairly confident of being able to get past them next week?
No, there's definitely a very, very big wariness and huge respect. I mean, this has started, I think, already from the Irish, provinces involved in the URC. South Africa, first and foremost, have loved the URC, and then have seen how the provinces have done well, Leinster, Ulster, and now specifically, Stormers being beaten by Munster. So it's really put a big scope on that. And that just relaying to the Irish side, really, as South African supporters know very well how it's been really our team that we've struggled with, on end of year tours. Specifically, it's a side that we haven't, managed to get over. And so they got huge respect for them, and they see them definitely as the biggest obstacle, I think, going forward through the World Cup. There's no doubt. Huge respect for them. They know the Irish systems to one part. They know how they've built this team up, and it's really is 1 versus 2. So that says it all. And South African supporters and guys that have been traveling view it at that. And I know from personal perspective, it's people have been asking for tickets since a year ago, and it's the big game the guys are looking forward to. This is the game they're looking forward to, and I think they'll take the next step after that. But everything's been built up to this game.
Yeah, James, and I know people might think we're getting ahead of ourselves talking about this match next week rather than the Tonga game, but I think it's just the fact, based on what we saw on Friday night as well between France and New Zealand, like I think it's as clear as it ever was now that you want to finish top of this pool. You want to avoid France in a quarterfinal. And it's not necessarily that you want to play New Zealand in a quarterfinal, but I don't think either of these two teams have any interest in going to the Stade de France to play France in a quarterfinal, particularly as well with one less day's preparation, because that's going to be the Saturday night game. It just makes this match even more important next week.
Yeah, it certainly does. And when you say it like that, it's the lesser of two evils to take New Zealand ahead of France. But I guess I'm sure the South Africans who looked at it, it's not the All Black side that we would have kind of known from a couple of years ago. They do not have that invincibility about them. And I think that's where South Africa and Ireland would say, yeah, we'd certainly prefer that, especially given the way the French at home, in front of that crowd, didn't play particularly well, but still managed to win. So I think it's a big case for both teams really going for it. I know it was all kind of permutations of whoever won or how we saw them, who we'd prefer to take. So I'm sure both teams now would be looking forward to trying to get one over. And I think that Ireland will certainly would prefer to play New Zealand because they certainly hold no fears to them. But a lot of water under the bridge to go first by getting past South Africa.
Yeah, and just one final point on that France and New Zealand game, BJ, as well. Antoine Dupont wasn't really at his best. One of the rare occasions where he was probably a little bit below par for France on Friday night. But on the flip side, there's probably a reassurance for France then that, okay, everything doesn't have to come through Antoine Dupont. We can get through games even when he's not at 100%. So there's a little bit of reassurance there that it's by no means a one-man team.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And I think France have showed it. Look, I had my doubts now after Intermac, and these guys were injured before the World Cup, and the doubts of would they be this kind of side that we saw before. And look, they've proven that even not playing to their best, they're beating New Zealand. Coming New Zealand, I thought I was back in New Zealand, coming off a loss against South Africa. I thought we'd have a massive reaction from them, but for me, New Zealand were just making those basic errors and stupid errors regarding, jumping up and knocking guys in the air, and these mistakes that the side like New Zealand doesn't make, and losing them to cards. So, look, France have shown now they are, I think, the side to kind of look at, and they're in their own country, and they, for me, the biggest threat around that, other than kind of Ireland. So for me, going forward, I think the guys will be very wary of playing them, early on. There's no doubt about that. And Dupont, he's really a top player when he's on form. So there's no doubt he will be invaluable to them.
Final couple of bits we'll touch on. I want to bring up England-Argentina, 27-10 win for England in the end. I won't really touch too much on Tom Curry's red card because that hearing is going on today pretty much as we're recording, and I might save that and the general refereeing inconsistencies for our podcast on Thursday. So tune in on Thursday and we'll talk a bit more about it, because we want to kind of get the idea of how Tom Curry's red card has been viewed. But in general, off this England win, James, a bizarre game in the end, and it was fascinating to see how the Argentinian players just seemed to unravel, and how their game unraveled with each George Ford drop goal in those space of about 10 minutes in the first half.
I know, and it's the small things. It's just it's there's not too much you can do to kind of stop a drop goal, really, and he's so good at it. It's quite frustrating, and it just seemed to rip the heart from them, and it's that passion that I mentioned even this weekend coming into Tonga, where you can kind of just take that sting out of it. And I think that's what England did quite well, just took the sting out of it and the passion out of the Argentinians, and their head dropped and they got frustrated with it as well, and it's not something you'd normally see, but it just goes to show how smart England were, unfortunately, and how it's like you mentioned it when we were talking about today, about it's cup rugby, and it's not about how glamorous. No one's going to care about how the quality of rugby you play. If England get over the line by putting up bombs and kicking goals, they'll do it, and no one will care if they have a winner's medal. So they're doing just what they have to do. It's the way Steve Borthwick had Leicester Tigers playing. It's percentages. It's forcing other teams to make errors. It's kicking the ball, and when you have someone like George Ford, and not many people call him for Marcus Smith to play because he's much more attacking. You've got George Ford who just runs the game and kicks his goal and is nice and safe and controlled, and it's winning the games.
Yeah, and they shipped a lot of criticism, and I think, and a lot of it fair as well over the last few weeks over the way they played and the results they had, BJ. But the composure they showed and the execution of it was very, very impressive on Saturday night. And if you look at the penalty count, Argentina gave away 16 penalties. 10 of those were when they were in attack. So like the pressure that England were putting them under in defence and around the breakdown contributed so much to the points they were able to win and the penalties they were able to put up on the board. It wasn't the prettiest performance we're ever going to see, but it was very, very effective. And it was the plan was executed about as perfectly as it could be.
Yeah, there's no doubt it was very effective. And I think if you'd ask anyone coming to this game, there's no doubt they'll be favouring Argentina, even though that Argentina didn't have the best rugby championship coming into this, but it was probably just the form of England, what has been happening in camp, the Farrell issue, kind of the unhappiness to one part. So it shows, that they are, kind of a team to be reckoned with. And coming into the World Cup, for me, England has always been that side that you can just never put down, because they just seem to keep the scoreboard ticking. And that's why they've been so successful in World Cups, over the years, is because they just keep those drop kicks, put the ball over the poles. And from a forwards perspective, and Argentina is driven a lot by their forward pack, that kind of trying to be that physical side and stuff. When you see that scoreboard ticking, it sucks it out of you, it really does. And then you make those errors kind of, I was really disappointed at how poor Argentina was. However, England, might have something here with George Ford going forward and building around that. And as I said before, they've come into World Cups 4th or 5th in the world, not obviously right. I don't know what they are now, and I know rankings are quite variable, but still, we shouldn't count them out in the sense of the threat they pose around that area from a cup rugby perspective.
Yeah, and James, finally then, fascinating to see what happens when Owen Farrell is fit and available for selection.
Yeah, massively so. I think you have to find a place for him somewhere, and it's only going to put more.
I mean, does he have to find a place for him in the starting team?
I think he does. Yeah, I do. I think he works. I don't mind him playing midfield. I know, and then you're kind of going, who misses out? But I do like to see Farrell in a side. I think England work better when Farrell plays in a side. And again, I think it's a case of it's that momentum of they'll be buoyed by this. Okay, they did well. 14 down to 14 men and can pull off this result within their camp. The confidence is going to be so high, and Farrell's coming back, and all of a sudden that momentum starts to pick up, and before you know it, they'll be like potentially in a quarter final and with an eye in a semi-final, and then you're like 80 minutes, 160 minutes away from winning a World Cup. And And that's a nice caveat to have for this squad, you know, who have been under pressure beforehand, who haven't played great rugby, but ultimately, due to the draw and certain things, that they're in a strong position.
Yeah, the competition has just opened right up for them after that win. Wales and Fiji, we've probably run out of time to talk about because there actually was a lot in it, but we will get to that on Thursday because Fiji and Australia is going to be a really interesting game at the weekend. So we'll chat about that a little bit more and a lot more things as well besides. A reminder that the games that are coming up this weekend starts on Thursday evening, France against Uruguay, 8 o'clock in Lille in Pool A. Then the other game in Pool A on Friday, 8 o'clock in Toulouse, New Zealand against Namibia. On Saturday from 2 p.m, you have Samoa against Chile in Pool D from Bordeaux, followed by Wales and Portugal at 4:45 in Pool C. That one's in Nice. And then Ireland against Tonga, 8 o'clock kickoff in Nantes. That is live on RT2 and RTÉ Player, as is South Africa against Romania on Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. from Bordeaux, and that Australia-Fiji game in Pool C at 4:45 in Saint Etienne. And the final game of the weekend then, England against Japan, 8 p.m. in Pool D from Nice. That is pretty much it from the podcast this afternoon. A reminder, we'll be back for more on the RTÉ podcast, RTÉ Rugby World Cup podcast on Thursday evening with reaction to the Ireland team news and a look ahead to the weekend's games. BJ and James, thanks a million again, and hopefully we'll see you both soon.
Cheers, Neil. Thanks for having us.
The rest of you, thanks for listening and watching. Get your questions into us for Thursday as well, and we'll speak to you then.